Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another exciting installment of our psychology module videos. This is module 21 in our third unit, sensation and perception. And so far we have talked a little bit about what exactly is sensation, what is perception, but now we're going to see what are the different things that actually influence our perception. So remember, sensation is just the initial input information, but perception is our interpretation of things. So what kinds of influences do we have on what shapes our interpretations of specific stimuli? So this is a pretty quick module. It's pretty short and sweet, straight to the point. So we're just going to talk about things like expectations, context, and motivation, and emotions that influence our perception, and then briefly talk about these concepts of ESP and parapsychology, but I'll discuss that a little bit more later on. So one really important term to know from this module is a perceptual set. This is probably the biggest takeaway from this module here. So a perceptual set is a mental predisposition to perceive one thing and not another. Basically, the easiest way to say this is that we see what we expect to see. So it's kind of this grouping of information that we keep in our mind that then affects what you're going to see. So let me explain that with this example a little bit here. If you first, and hopefully we can demonstrate this in class. So if you watch this before class, please don't spoil it. If you first view this picture here, take a second to look at it, tell me what you see. You might see an old woman in this. So here would be like the nose, and then she's got a nice long chin here. This is kind of like some wrap or something she has on her head. This would be the hair. This is her eye. So this would be an older woman that you might see here. So then when you see this image, which is slightly different, you might see an old woman, right? However, if you see this image first, so you might have to look away for a second to like reset your mind, then look at this image here. You might see a young woman in this image. So here she's kind of looking away like, oh my, kind of thing. So this is her chin turned to the side down here. This will be her ear. And then you can see like one of her eyelashes and her nose right there. And she's kind of got like a fancy little feather on her head. So then when you see this picture, the second one, which was the same second image on the last slide, so this one and this one are the same. Now you might see the young woman when you look at this picture. So basically it's interesting that in class what we usually like to do is show half the class the image of the old woman first and the other half of the class the image of the younger woman. And then we show them this combined picture here and ask, what do you see? And everyone at the same time is like, old woman, young woman. So basically we can influence and determine which mental set we're going to activate in your mind by priming you. So mental sets, perceptual sets have to do with priming as well, which is something that was in the past module. So priming is we're trying to get you to think a specific way. So by me showing you the young woman, I am priming you to activate that perceptual set of here's what a young woman looks like and everything. And then when I show you this final image here, you will activate again that perceptual set and you'll see the young woman. And vice versa with the older woman. I prime you with the old woman, that activates that perceptual set. So then in this image, you see the old woman. So that is what a perceptual set is. So another example here is take a look at this and these red lines here. What do you see? What does that look like? Think about it for a second. So there's really two different answers that you might give, and that again depends on which perceptual sets are activated. So if you see it in the context of the number 12 and then you see below it the number 14, you might see those two red lines as the number 13 because you have that perceptual set of numbers and the way that numbers are drawn, what they look like. So you think 12, oh, that's got to be a 13 and then a 14. Or if you see it in this context where there's the letter A and on the other side the letter C, that activates that perceptual set of the alphabet and what that looks like. So then you see those lines there and think, oh, well, that must be the letter B because after A comes B and B comes before C. So again, you activate different perceptual sets based on what's around it. So you can influence what's perceived there. So this also has to do with top-down processing. Hopefully you can make that connection as well for Module 20. So think real quick, what was top-down processing? And basically top-down processing was when you have something already in your mind, which here we can see it relates that it's your perceptual set. You have a perceptual set in your mind. So then that influences how you're going to perceive an image. So depending on if you see this image here together, depending on if first you saw numbers or if you saw letters first, that influences which way you will see those this green square here, if it's the letter B or if it's the number 13. So your experience, your top-down processing influences what you're going to perceive. And yeah, this just explains that a little bit more. So there's another example here that gets into a little bit more of context and everything. So if you look at this picture, what do you see here? Where is this family? What are they doing? And it's really interesting. We see that people who are from rural East African areas see a woman with a box on her head and a family under a tree. So this part right here, this square, they would say that it's something she's balancing on her head, and that this part back here is a tree. So they must be outside. And that's because it's common in those areas for women to fill up like a bucket with water and then carry it on their heads. So that's going to influence what they see here when they see this picture. But if you ask Westerners, so maybe people who are like here from the United States, what you see here, you might instead see this as a picture, of a window that is to outside. So you can see that this family is indoors, and this white black part back here would be the corner of a room. And then this is a window that is just sitting above them. So it's not actually on her head, it's just behind her. So what culture you have grown up with influences what you're going to see. And that's exactly what brings us to our next point in terms of how context and emotion and everything influences your perceptions. So try this question real quick. On a warm summer day, Kimberly tells her brother to put on a suit. Kimberly's brother knows to put on a swimsuit instead of a business suit, because suit, who knows what she means. But since it's a warm summer day, he knows to put on a swimsuit instead of a business suit because of what? Which would be our correct answer here? So this would be A, context. So he can figure out the context of it's a warm summer day. She must mean swimsuit, even though she just said the word suit. All right, so we also know that motivation, besides context, motivation can influence your perception. So for example, if you have a heavy backpack on your back and you're looking up at this hill that you've got to walk up, that can make your destination seem further away because you're feeling pretty tired. You've got this big thing you're lugging around, you're tired, you're not feeling super motivated right now. So that means this end point up at the top of the hill must be really far away. So definitely another example of how motivation influences your perception. And you can see a couple other examples here. Emotion is another thing that influences perception. So when angry, people might often perceive a neutral object as a gun, which can obviously be very dangerous in specific situations with situations like when police are involved and everything. So obviously I know that that can definitely be a sensitive topic and everything, but I'm just saying how emotions can certainly influence what you are seeing. Another thing is that if you hear sad music, that can predispose or prime you to perceive sad meanings from homophones, words that sound alike. So if I play a really sad song, you hear that, and then I say the word morning to you, if you heard that sad song, you might think the word mourning that I'm saying is the kind of when someone has passed away, like I'm in mourning, I'm sad. Versus if you hear maybe happier music, then you might hear the word morning and think it's day, the sun is rising, it's a wonderful morning, something like that. So that is also how emotion can influence perception. So the main points of all those things here are basically, like we said, we see what we want to see in this world. And that's the really cool and tricky thing about perception is we might all be looking at the exact same thing, but all see it in different ways. And so if you take these things into account, think back to last class when we showed the images of the black and white splotches and everything, and maybe you saw a picture of Jesus in one of them. Something that could influence whether or not you actually saw Jesus in that is if you're a religious person and what religion you practice. So if you're someone who focuses on Jesus in your religion, that might make you a little more predisposed to have that perceptual set be activated that this must be Jesus. Or of the picture that ended up being the cow, if you work on a farm, you live in a rural area, you're more quick to notice that cow. So those are how things that, depending on what life experiences you have, your mood, your context, your culture, all those things can influence the way that you perceive something. So it's interesting that everyone can see the exact same thing in a different way based on their own personal experiences and how they're feeling. So this last quick part here about influences on perception is the idea of parapsychology and ESP. So parapsychology is the study of paranormal phenomena, including ESP and psychokinesis, which is the ability of the mind to move objects. So if you have ever seen the show Stranger Things, you know, Eleven, her big thing is psychokinesis. She could maybe like make a door close all of a sudden, something like that. So ESP is extrasensory perception. And it's basically the thing when people are kind of saying that they are like psychic in some sort of way. So it might be that they have telepathy, which is when you can hear people's thoughts in their minds. Clairvoyance, you can see remote events going on. So you might be here in a specific location, but you can tell in a state away that there's a fire burning. Or precognition, which is the typical thing you think of when you hear psychic, which is you can see the future. So ESP is this very, very controversial thing that awareness can occur apart from sensory input. So basically it's the saying we have some kind of perception without the actual sensation. So your mind is just jumping right to the perception part. And there's been lots of different studies that have happened with ESP. And basically, as we said, it's very controversial, lots of things that are mixed. Sometimes they might see certain results with things that tend to lean towards, yeah, maybe there is such a thing as ESP. But as this example shows here, it could also just be that if enough people are claiming that they can determine certain events, eventually some people are going to be right. It's just statistically possible that that's going to happen. So in this experiment with this mind machine, they wanted to see if people could predict a coin toss. And they had almost just about 50% of people which guess it correctly. So does that mean 50% of people are actually psychic? Or does it just mean we know that statistically the odds of it being heads or tails is 50%? So maybe that's why that happened. So there's no real conclusion on yes, in fact, ESP is a thing, or no, it's not. But rather it's something that's still kind of being investigated, and you know that your own beliefs and ideas about things can influence that, because we might also have confirmation bias, which we'll talk about in a couple units. And confirmation bias is basically just saying that if you claim that you have ESP and you can see the future, and then you actually get something right, like I say, tomorrow it's going to rain, and then tomorrow it does rain, I might be like, see, yep, exactly, I told you. In fact, I am someone who is able to predict the future. But let's say if I say tomorrow it's going to snow, and then it doesn't snow, I kind of just forget about that part. I'm like, no, I have ESP. We don't count that one in there. So that's why we don't really have a legitimate answer on this one necessarily. So researchers have been unable to replicate any ESP claims under our controlled conditions in labs and everything. So like I said, short and sweet, that's it. So just make sure you know the main term of perceptual set here. That's the big one. The ESP and parapsychology, that's something that's really not heavily focused on the AP exam or anything, and we're probably not going to talk about too much in class. So know about it, know it exists, but it's not necessarily where you should put most of your efforts here for this module. All right, so we will see you in class. Have a wonderful day, everybody.